Good morning. Another Sunday morning. We are still reading on white magic. And for anyone who has a book, it's page 130. And if it's online, it is in rule 4. I'm going to start in the middle of the page. Several things are apparent at this juncture to the careful thought of men and motives. First, that idealism and sensing of the plan for humanity have a close relationship. Idealism is analogous to the thought that precedes creation, and that idealism attaches for us with our imagination. And so if we want to come up with some new idea or thought, it's our imagination that we use first. And then there is the creation. We either follow through with our thought, or if it's a thought that just doesn't seem to have legs, it'll fade into la la land, and we start thinking about imagining something else that's more workable. So idealism, analogous to the thought that precedes creation, the capacity for abstract thought and for concentration on the ideal is only now in process of development. Well, the reason you would think that is because the abstract thought is on the Buddhic plane, and we are only beginning to really have a little bit of an access to the Buddhic plane and the knowledge that it's there, much less to be operating on it. Because abstract thought is that infallible information that he talks about on the Buddhic plane, because it is what is. So you didn't need any deductive or inductive logic to get anywhere with it. Once you function on that plane, you have the answers when the questions arise. You know what the answers are, and you didn't have to do any deduction to get to them. The capacity for abstract thought and for concentration on the ideal is only now in process of development, for this capacity involves the utilization of certain atoms, the employment of matter of the higher subplanes, and the ability to synchronize one's vibrations with the great ones. Only a few people in the race are true idealists, though their numbers are increasing. The small minority only employ the concrete mind, while the masses are swayed entirely by emotions. The time is coming when the intuitional body, the Buddhic vehicle, will be organized utilizing the higher spiritual mind as its medium. When that organization is completed, the lower concrete mind will be nothing but a transmitter or an interpreter. Even abstract or concrete thought will be superseded, and we shall have simply a flow of the intuition taking form through the medium of the mind stuff. We shall therefore have the apprehension of much that is now incomprehensible to our lower plane vision. And that's really what all of this material is working towards, is the development of your capacity to function on these higher planes. In other words, you are moving on up, and as you move up those planes, you become equal to those planes and absorb that energy, and it's part of your world or your entire body, if you will. It expands, and you have access to that other kind of energy. That's the whole goal of this material. And so that's why at this point we have the apprehension of much that is now incomprehensible to our lower plane vision. You just can't see it. And I think, Donnie, you've said before, you can't see what you can't see. You can't know what you don't know yet.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
It's everything. We don't know anything.
Yeah. And so, because you'll get those 5 senses that we've talked about, and there are 5 subplanes as you move up the levels he's talking about here. The sense and whatever subplane you're on develops and opens up. So then you have access to more information. And the information, most of it in this case, is going to be subtle. It's going to be unseen. In other words, you're going to get the information. It's coming to you. It'll drop into your mind. You'll be aware of something, but nobody else will probably understand how you knew that unless they're operating the same manner. But because the 5 senses that we have that we're aware of, we understand when we hear. As long as our hearing is working, we're going to catch those vibrations. As long as our eyeballs are working, we're going to catch vibrations that come, range of light that comes by. And then we have our organic ones, which is the touch and the taste and the smell, which are a little more localized. But that's our input. And we don't get input without those senses. That is the way it all comes in terms of our environment and even our more mental awarenesses. It just doesn't, we're so immersed in phenomena and noise, if you go signal the noise, that we think there's a lot of things happening to us because we're just bombarded by everything around us. It is the great illusion that they talk about, because all of this generally is going to come through vibrations. That's how and then we translate it. It's just like he's talking in twin dimensions, that it's light that comes to our eye and we read the code in the light, and that's what we see. So if you want to talk about the glamour, the great illusion is the biggest glamour, because he talks about glamour a lot, because we think though that this is real. And from the levels above, it's not. That's why if you're looking at that chart, from page 117, the beings on top of the chart understand that whatever's going on here is a dream. It is an illusion. It is a learning process. It is a building of consciousness process. But if there's a war, or if there's a killing, nobody died. The essence of who you are does not die. The form you're using at that time dies, which is really pretty hard to absorb when you're down in those areas and you're connected emotionally to someone, because it's part of your being. I mean, you lose a child, it cuts out your heart, because you are connected at those levels, and it's very real. But evidently to the guys up on level number 2 and level number 1, they just look at that as, okay, well, that if it's going to make the big changes that need to be made, if it's going to make the shift, then we're not going to try and stop it. Because this planet has its evolutionary pattern, and that's primary. Okay. So, and I stopped where we said, we shall therefore have the apprehension of much that is now incomprehensible to our lower plane vision. So until you are fully conscious up on those levels, you would not experience those ideas. In fact, they'd probably be quite disdainful. In all the great movements, you have some thought or aggregation of thoughts cast into the minds of the so-called idealists by the Great White Brotherhood. So your great movements come because those thought forms are directed towards the beings who can embody them and present them. The idea is sounded forth by them. They choose a man or a group of men and cast into their minds some idea. There it germinates and is embodied by them in other thoughts, not so pure or so wise, but necessarily colored by the individuality of the thinker. And so there's where we talk about it. It does get synthesized through whoever the individual is. These thought forms are in their turn picked up by the concrete thinkers of the world who, grasping the main outline of the idea, crystallize it and build it into a more definite shape, into one more easily apprehended by the general public. It has therefore now reached the lower levels of the mental plane, and a further development is possible. It is then seized upon as desirable by those who are focused on the astral plane. To them, it makes an emotional appeal, becoming public opinion. It is now practically ready to take shape upon the physical plane, and we have the practical adaptation of an ideal to the needs of the physical life. It's been stepped down. It has lost much of its original beauty. It is not as pure and as lovely as when first conceived, and it is distorted from its original shape, but it is nevertheless more adapted to public use and can be employed as a stepping stone to higher things. Secondly, in this sensing of the plan and its later materialization, human units are involved and men have perforce been employed. A vision is given of tremendous possibilities, and indications are also granted of the manner in which these possibilities may become facts. But beyond that, the great ones do not go. The detail and the method of concretizing the ideal and the necessary work is left to the sons of men. To the disciple who is an organizer and a transmitter of the plan falls the work of filling in details and of taking necessary action. At this point, it is wise for him to remember that he comes with his little plans under the same law as do the great ones in their larger endeavors, and that it is in his dealings with people and his manipulation of the human equation that the difficulties arise. And there always will be problems. Those who can sense the plan are commissioned to work it out. Those who can be used but who are blind to the greater issues, and those who can sense nothing except those things which concern their own selfish interest. The first group, the masters can contact. Okay. They work with these units of the human family and expect fair promise of average success. These both hear the sound and vision the plan. The second group have to be utilized as best may be by the disciples of the world. The final group are frequently to be offset from the energy standpoint and only used when necessary. So you can kind of see a large group movement structure there. And you probably see some of those that are out there in process of being created at this point in time. You know, there's larger groups out there that are global now that work with the same thought patterns and ideas and you know, they don't all embody the same ideas and plans, and they're not all there for the same reason, but they're all a group that have some momentum together. One of the primary conditions that a disciple has to cultivate in order to sense the plan and to be used by the master is solitude. Can't stress that enough. In solitude, the rose of the soul flourishes. In solitude, the divine self can speak. In solitude, the faculties and the graces of the higher self can take root and blossom in the personality. In solitude, also, the master can approach and impress upon the quiescent soul the knowledge that he seeks to impart, the lesson that must be learnt, the method and the plan for work that the disciple must grasp. In solitude, the sound is heard. The great ones have to work through human instruments, and the plan and the vision are much handicapped by the failure on the part of these instruments, which I would guess is absolutely accurate. And also, we're talking in that paragraph, we're talking about the vibration and the rate of vibration on every stage of that. And when you do not have solitude and you have most of the rates of vibration of the sounds that we hear down here, it would just block these higher vibrations. In other words, if you're, so you need that solitude so that the air is clear enough that it can move through here and then connect and get a clear picture. So otherwise, one rate of vibration will kick another one out. And the grosser rates of vibration will just move those others off. They're not coming around. Third, this brings me to the third point, the problems and the difficulties which the masters have to contend as they seek to further the plans of evolution through the medium of the sons of men. In conclave wise, they make their plans with judgment after due discussion. They apportion the tasks. Then to those who offer themselves for service and who have some measure of soul contact, they seek to transmit as much of the plan as possible. They impress the plan and some suggestion as to its scope upon the mind of some men or some women on the physical plane. If that mind is unstable or oversatisfied, if it is filled with pride, with despair or self-deprecation, the vision does not come through with clarity of outline. If the emotional body is vibrating violently with some rhythm set up by the personality, or if the physical vehicle is ailing and concentrated attention is therefore prevented, what will happen? The master will turn sadly away, distressed to think of the opportunity for service that the worker has lost through his own fault. And he will seek someone else to fill the need. Someone perhaps not so fundamentally suitable, but the only one available on account of the failure of the first one approached. So one should have a responsibility to keep yourself healthy and with clarity of mind, and have your vehicle operating. It might incidentally be of value here to remind aspirants to service that much work done by many is the result of overzealousness and not a carrying forward of the master's work. With wise discrimination, he apportions the work and never lays upon one human being more than he can adequately accomplish. He can and does train his disciples so that it appears to the onlooking world as if he accomplishes miracles, but forget not that the vast amount of work accomplished by one useful disciple only becomes possible when the control of all of his three bodies is coordinated and his alignment accomplished. And so that's the mental, the physical, and the emotional are coordinated. They also call that an integrated personality, where they all work together. He who has a stable mental body that is strongly positive in reception from above, whilst negative to lower vibrations. He who has an astral body that is clear, uncolored, and still. He who also has a physical body with steady nerves and stable rhythm. It will be like a casket, beautiful yet strong as steel, will serve as a vessel meant for the master's use, a channel through which he can unhindered pour his blessings upon the world. There has to be an in. If it's going to come to the lower planes, there has to be an in, and the in has to be a vehicle who can receive and doesn't have obstruction in different sectors of that vehicle as it receives. Fourth, it should be noted that even the great ones themselves have to lay their plans largely allowing for the lack of perception of those on the physical plane through whom they have to work. And that's certainly understandable, because the higher ideals, the higher ideas, if you will, or plans are foreign to our nature, more likely than not. So getting it down here and then having it being received intact, and then being able to interpret it in its advanced mode. I mean, those are not easy things to have happen. Because then the individual will sit here and think, am I imagining this? Oh, that doesn't, and we'll throw all of our lower challenges, just the normal challenges of a three-dimensional world in terms of what the obstacles are, and likely rejects part of it because it just seems like it's impossible. It would be something impossible to have happen. Because you don't realize how the energy works on other planes until you've been there and you can see it. In the same way that Christ came along and so miracles happened. They made a word for it. It was a miracle. Okay. Because it was contradistinctive in its action to what's possible here. So, fourth, it should be noted the great ones themselves have to lay their plans largely allowing for the lack of perception of those on the physical plane through whom they have to work. They're handicapped and dependent upon their physical plane instruments, and their main trouble concerns the point of evolution reached by the mass of men in the Occident. Okay. Remember that this point is indicative of the success of the evolutionary process and not of its failure. But because much yet remains to be done, the work of the lodge is often hindered. The point reached at this time might be expressed as a swinging from the rank materialism of the past into a growing and profound realization from the unseen worlds without the balance that comes from self-acquired knowledge. Forces that have been set in motion by the thinkers, the scientists of the world, and the truly advanced religious men, the spiritualists, the Christian scientists, the new thought workers, the theosophists, and the modern philosophers and workers in other fields of human thought, are gradually and steadily affecting the subtler bodies of humanity and are bringing them to a point where they are beginning to realize three things: the reality of the unseen world, the terrific power of thought, and the need for scientific knowledge on these two matters. And we certainly are proceeding in that direction now. And that was why I think maybe this late 70s or early 80s, there were scientists who were saying, well, we've discovered everything there is to know about science now. And Feynman came along and said, well, there's a lot of room at the bottom, meaning the going down to the cellular level and to the atomic level, which is where we are dealing now. Okay, because we hadn't even dealt with that at all. So, I mean, and that's what in fact happened, is that's where they did redirect, and that's where incredible things are occurring at this point. So, and that would be the reality of an unseen world, because they knew there was an atom and they knew that there was a lot of space in it, empty space. In fact, I think Blavatsky described it as scratching out a hole in space or something, and that was her description of the atom. Might have been a little more concise than that, but not much initially when it talked about it. Certain dangers which aspirants must watch as they seek to be of use should here be mentioned. They must guard against overemphasizing one aspect at the expense of another part of the plan or vision. They must avoid unequal concentration of thought upon that part of the plan which appeals to them most personally. Because if they're doing that, they're putting their emotion into it. They must recognize the inability of workers to continue to bring through the plans and to work together peacefully and steadily. Friction is often unavoidable. And I think he found that with all his group work. When he tried to do group work, is you're not going to put it together and have it peaceful and steadily work. It's one of the great challenges, but it's also inevitable when you're working on these lower planes, because they're designed to have friction. That's what I talk about when we do astrology, is that whole circle is in conflict when you've divided into 12 parts, because you're not going to get any rest here. You're not going to be able to just sit down and do nothing. And it's guaranteed evolution. You're going to keep making things happen, whether you like it or not. It's just in the program. They must watch for the creeping in of self-interest and of ambition. They must guard against fatigue due to long effort in materializing the plan and the strain incident upon the high endeavor. They must develop the capacity to recognize those who are sent to help them in the work. They must, above all, watch against failure to keep in touch with the higher self and with the master. Another point that has to be remembered is that the problem to be solved by all who are seeking to cooperate with the Great White Lodge has 4 objects in view. First, that in the working out of the plan, there is also the working out of karma. This karma is not merely individual nor purely national, but is part of the total working out of world karma. And so, we are always banting the word karma around, and oh, that guy is ensuing bad karma, and so on and so forth. Well, there's a lot of karma out there that deals with the status of any given entity. And when I talk about entity, I'm not just talking about people. I'm talking about a planet. I'm talking about a solar system, if you will. They have their own history and their own karma, of which, because we're born here, we're subject to. But it's not our personal karma that we engendered. We inherited it when we were born here. And there's other books that deal with it a lot better than what I just indicated here. And I mean, some of that may be inevitable from the Big Bang. Okay, but is karma that pervades the entire system that has yet to be worked out in the process and agenda that's the long-term one. So we only look at our little personal, generally emotionally driven attitude about karma, and see it just as a personal issue. But there is karma, so to speak, on a planet, a solar system, a set of constellations. I mean, it's gigantic and everybody's got it. So the only thing that I do keep mentioning is generally when people talk about karma, it's always somebody else who's engendering bad karma. And they generally never think they might be paying off bad karma themselves this time, and that you know, it's payback time and they're the ones doing the payback instead of the other guy. You know, nobody really generally seems to identify with that. I have yet to hear someone, or actually I did hear one person once who said, oh, I know why that happened, because I did such and such. And I thought, oh, wow, you really know it. But anyway, secondly, the other objective is the preparing of an instrument for service in the inauguration of the new age during the next 200 years. So there we get a date. This book was published, I think, in 1934 was the first printing of this book. And he's talking about the next 200 years. So you can calculate that from 1934 to 2034 to 2134. Anyway, the integration of a group of knowers and of mystics is going on steadily in all parts of the world and in all organizations. One group is being gathered, but its members belong to many groups. To this group of knowers and mystics is given the opportunity of being the channel through which the hierarchy can work and through which the great ones can send their illuminating thought. Now, when we talk about the hierarchy and the great ones, we are talking about beings that have made the journey and function on the spiritual triad. That's where the hierarchy is. And then any entities that are on the upper two planes of that chart. Okay. But a lot of them originate, most of them are humans who have journeyed through and made the journey. Okay. Through it, also, they can work for the uplift in the occult sense of humanity and thus aid evolution on every plane. According to the responses of disciples, of mystics, and of knowers everywhere, so will be the rapid coming in of the new age. And it should be, because the new age is Aquarian, it's going to be mental. And so the word rapid speeds up with it, because the longest journeys are the very early initiatory processes. And once you hit the mental plane, it's just like your thoughts can move at rapid pace. You know, they do not have the limitation that your arms do when they carry loads of wood from one place to another, and that you have to walk it there. Your thoughts can dart here, there, and elsewhere. So when we start moving to the mental plane, the evolutionary development should speed up. It's just a matter of being able to get there. I would seek here, you know, I'm always losing my place here. A new page, right? I would seek here to sound a word of warning in the failure to respond, in the failure to adjust, construct, and refine in the failure to turn the inner ear to those voices on the subtler planes which utter the words of reconstruction, may come the ultimate transference of the forces of reconstruction to other channels. The consequent withholding of opportunities and the ultimate discarding of the instrumentality of the group as a medium of service. I would like to emphasize the statement anent the words of reconstruction, begging all of you who earnestly desire to hear these words to study the introduction to the book, The Light on the Path. Have you looked at that one, Donnie?
That's Patanjali, right? That's the.
It may well be. I
believe so.
haven't followed it. Let it be remembered that if the great ones have to change their plans as to this integrating group of mystics, it will be changed by the mystics themselves, viewed as a group. And of course, the mystics are the astral plane.
Is that Mabel Collins? Light on the Path?
I don't know.
Hmm.
Anyway.
Hmm.
The third objective is the development of the intuition and discrimination of the disciples in the world and their ability to sense the higher vision and to achieve at the cost of the lower, the consciousness of that higher plane. They will have to remember that the lower objective, owing to its proximity, will loom in many ways more attractive and can only be transcended at infinite cost. Intuition must be developed in many people and their sense of values adequately adjusted before this group, which must inaugurate the new age, can measure up to the requirements. So that in itself is a challenge. Present day troubles are largely due to the lack of intuitive perception in the past, and this fault lies primarily among the mystics of the world and not so much among the lower aspirants. This trouble has not lain in lack of idealism or even in a lack of intelligence and sincerity. It consists in the failure to sacrifice the personality at all times in order to make the intuitive realization demonstrate its realities. Compromise has been permitted, and in the occult world, compromise is forbidden. A good note.
Yeah.
Yep.
When
indulged, yeah. When it indulged in it, it leads to disaster and sweeps away eventually in ruin and in storm the personalities of those who so stoop. So if they're stooping, they're looking down and they're moving downward and they are compromising the material.
Right. I've for sure done that. I mean.
Well, and that's what happened with the Theosophical Society in general, is the compromises they were making members, calling them masters and so on and so forth. It was just a perversion of what it was supposed to be. And I mean, that's why this material, this group left and broke off. And this information is separate from where it might have been able to have been a following of Blavatsky. It had to be shut down. So,
well, compromise is forbidden. So
right. Yeah. I mean, it won't work. There's no way that it could work.
It's just so powerful.
Yeah. If you're going up, you're not going down. You know, down means you're going backwards and lowering your vibration. etc., etc. So he says, when that compromise is indulged in, it leads to disaster, sweeps away eventually in ruin and in storm the personalities of those who so stoop. People who have sought to adjust the truth to the hour instead of adjusting the hour to the truth. And in much diplomacy, they have endeavored to bring about as much of the reality as they deem wise. The masters are looking out for those with clear vision, uncompromising adherence to the truth as sensed, and capacity to drive steadily forward towards the ideal. This entails the following factors: a recognition of that ideal through meditation, its application to the present through one-pointedness, the removal of the old and hindering thought forms through self-sacrifice, a refusal to compromise through clear vision, a discrimination that enables the disciple always to distinguish between the acts of an individual and the individual himself. The realization that in the occult work, it is not permitted to interfere with personal karma any more than it is permitted to shield from the consequence of action. This entails, therefore, a refusal to interfere in anyone's business, that is, as regards the personality life, yet involves a refusal to shirk the business of the larger cause. It's essential that the workers learn to discriminate between the factors which make for personal liberty and those which militate against group liberty. So it's always been indicated that you can't interfere with somebody else's life. And I think it's always been indicated that masters can't come down and change somebody else's life or interfere with it. Each individual has to make their own individual decisions and go in their own direction. So, and their choices, they are therefore responsible for their choices. So contrary to asking somebody else, what should I do? Or having somebody who's supposed to be your teacher or something telling you what to do, you have to act on your own. Because that's you, that in your vehicle that you're directing. But it's not there for someone else to run or control your life or make your choices for you. Okay. It all has to fall back on you. The fourth result to be brought about by the present opportunity to work is the bringing in the new cycle and the new group of participants. Workers in the new era will be drawn from all groups, and the test of their choice depends largely upon the measure of impersonality with which they work and the strength of their inner contact with their soul. It is not easy for any of you, therefore, submerged as you are in the smoke and the roar of battle, to judge results with accuracy or to judge people with perfect propriety. These things have to be dealt with on the inner planes and are noted by the watching guides of the race. I would like here briefly to point out a few of the things for which the great ones look. They look to see whether the inner flame, the result of effort wisely to work and think and do, burns with increased brilliance. They note whether it remains hidden and dim through the whirl of astral currents and by thought forms of personal antagonism, ambition, and envy. As a result of world work, some will be drawn into closer connection with the work of the hierarchy, others will be temporarily set back. Capacity to dominate the astral and to work from mental levels will largely count. I mean, that is part of the objective is moving up onto the mental plane. So it's seen as counting for a lot. They look to see who can struggle and contend for principle with personalities and yet keep the link of love intact. This counts perhaps more than men realize, and a man who can stand for principle and yet love all human beings, refusing to compromise and yet refusing to hate, has something rare to offer in these days, and the great ones can use him. I want to make a point here, might as well. The terminology nowadays in the psychological world with some of these younger people is, well, that person is broken. That's a very common term. And I don't think any human being is broken. It's a matter of understanding what stage in the process of development they are. I mean, I guess this is one of the benefits I have in terms of astrology, because I can look at the dynamics of this geometrical creation, if you will. The chart, looking at it and seeing the geometry of it and so on and so forth. And I know the expressions that come from the different components. So it's a matter of figuring out where you are at any given moment in that stage of development to figure out what they're doing and what their agenda is. But the term broken, I think, is used in a generic sense of, well, I'm going to evaluate you against everybody else and the general agenda that we think human beings should be functioning. And, you know, you're not there, so you're broke. And, you know, which I think is just a horrible term for an evaluation, because we know with the transits, this comes, that comes, this might be eroded during that period of time. Whatever is going to come in its place hasn't shown up yet. Or we got a Scorpio planet just sitting in park, not wanting to move or do whatever. But that's not broke. It's just, where are you in the stage and the process of being that's connected with that particular agenda, that particular chart. So, but I think the broken is quick and easy. I think that's what's happening. And they just love to go after the boomer generation, I guess, and blame them for everything from their forward that's wrong with every other little cultural group. Because I hear it, you know, and it's like, and this was from a psychologist giving advice to a student that I have, and says basically, well, you know, I think our whole generation is fucked. Those boomers, they got all the money, and now we don't, you know, we don't have access to it, or something like that, and blaming them for a whole generation. You know, and I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, here you are, you're a little person sitting in a desk, looking out, and you are throwing away an entire generation of human beings who've been created relative to being on this planet and being involved in our solar system, and you can pronounce them just all fucked. And so, and we got somebody to blame. So nobody's gonna should bother to work out whatever their problems are. But I mean, it's and look at the limited scope. Donnie. You're having fun with this one, so smile. Tell me what you're smiling
No,
about.
it's a very defeatist attitude and pretty, man, I don't know. I don't even know what to think about that. You're just so judgmental of the outs of others, I guess, at that point. I don't know. I don't know where to go with that. It's just, it's funny in a way, but it's not.
Not for the people she's giving the advice to who are of that age group.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing.
That kind of inhibits the whole, or at least I would think it would inhibit the upward direction and growth of that specific generational group that says that or makes that type of comment, because what the boomers did was they basically kind of introduced something new. And now we're kind of dealing with the stuff because things have evolved over time. And instead of thinking of ways to move up and outward beyond that, which is what should be that generational group should be doing, it's easier for them to point the blame at why everything's so messed up because some generational group before them made some strides to make things better at that point in time. So they're just inhibiting their own growth by making those types of comments, because you're not doing anything productive by just saying everything's messed up because the boomers did this to us. Well, no, you making that comment, you're really kind of laying it on yourself.
Yeah.
You're not letting yourself move forward.
I think just allowing somebody like that to be heard is one of the more amazing parts of it.
Well, it was a private practice she had, and this was one of her clients, but that was the assessment. But I'm thinking, yes, because in a scenario like that, you don't have the scope that we probably have. Certainly I have in terms of being an astrologer, because I'm looking at different age groups all the time, and the generational, those outer planets are the ones that define the generational scope, and it just keeps moving. And it's part of the agenda on a planetary basis and the solar system basis, if you will, and the evolution of the larger systems that we are part of. But there's no understanding of that at all, or seeing how they fit together. It's just the education. In fact, I think that person had listened to one tape of this, just started it and said, this isn't mechanical enough for me. Okay, in other words, and if I don't have a one-liner process for you that's mechanical, okay, list all this that you're doing this week, we'll start tearing this apart, kind of thing. But it was like, it's and of course people aren't mechanical, they're flowing. So it's interesting, but that's another generational viewpoint, because this certainly, the process that you guys go through when you work with this material, okay, is not mechanical. I mean, something gets in there. Let's go to you for a minute, Tom, because we were talking about your wife had her chart done and you had yours done much earlier. And so you've had more time to process it. But what happens, this is a question to you, what happens when you have the information, even though it's, I don't know, how did you describe it initially?
Well, I thought it was a super villain.
Oh, you saw yourself as a super villain. And what did she call hers?
I don't, she didn't really classify, just kind of,
oh,
she put it in terms of like, it gave her a lot to think about. I mean, essentially, it kicks you in the butt when you first hear it. Yeah. And it's, I think that's kind of the intended purpose, because you kind of need that swift butt kicking to make yourself realize that, you know, things that you've done in the past, or things that happened in a certain way, it's kind of all there right before you, when you have that chart, because now things can start to clarify. And for me, at least, it made sense why I might have done something a certain way in the past. But for rolling forward, it provides you with a little bit of insight, actually a lot of insight about yourself, so that you can kind of better handle things as they come going forward. Because I mean, it's not like you can anticipate what's going to happen, but as it's happening, you can kind of reflect back and align it with your own personality profile, and it should help you be able to better kind of.
So would you consider that, I mean, I think that's a rather organic process that just occurs when you have that consciousness now to work with, to make choices of how you choose to proceed. You know, but I think it's subtle sometimes.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, your brain gets that awareness and that consciousness that has something to work with. It can make choices. But you know, so anyway, so I mean, but that so you know, and I think that understanding may be missing now, in terms of maybe they're a little more pragmatic about, well, this is the way you are, okay, or you're stuck. I mean, they don't see the subtle transitions that occur once the brain's got the material to handle it. It goes into the mind starts working on, okay, well, we could do this easier, or we can, you know, dislodge that idea. We don't have to sit with that one anymore. And it makes life a little better. Generally, I would think.
Yes. After you've worked through the tension, I think. So, I mean, there's always going to be tension, and that's the other thing too. It's not supposed to be an easy road, and it kind of brings that to light as well. But you get to the point of better because you realize you have to work through the tension in order to get to the better, I think, is maybe a good way to put it. Like, it just doesn't instantly make things better. You have to do work in order for the better to come.
Right. But I think once that information is in other words, we have the dynamic within us and the ability to change something and to rework things. And I'm not sure that they understand that, and that kind of those little, what we would have called miracles before or something, happen all the time, because this energy is not stuck in place. The energy we are is volatile. It's always moving. It's always got the potential to change. And obviously we do. We grow old and we look a lot different than we did when we were younger. We know something's happening here. But a lot of that then just, I think, does become subtle in terms of the changes and the adjustments, and then just demonstrates itself in the outer world by your actions and your interactions. What are you looking for, Donnie?
Heard a beep. I heard it too.
Yeah, it was originated over here.
Oh, okay.
It's a toaster.
Your house is not catching on fire.
No, no, it's not. Maybe the toast is. Bread might be. Do you have anything to add to that, Donnie? We're talking about once you have a different conscious awareness of things, then the mind has a way of processing. I mean, look at what happens with this Bailey material. You read it and then you come back and read it a week later.
Yeah, I think, maybe over in a slow manner, you become more aware of the process, and you become more aware of yourself in the process. And then it's just very subtle. And then there will be times that slip by where you don't even see any growth or think about growth because you weren't looking at it. But then when you look at it, you see that it was there. I don't know how to,
Because
if
it
that
was
makes
subtle.
any sense
Yeah.
or not. It's just very subtle.
Yeah.
Well, and it's like you said, Carla, I think once you have started to build that awareness of it, that subtleness it's because it's becoming more organic for the individual, perhaps, that it just kind of happens.
We have a whole lot of us that we don't understand. I mean, if you think of us and think of that chart, page 117, we're aware on the bottom 2 levels, and there's 5 more levels to go.
Mhm.
And the energy does move, and the energy has its own awareness and ability to function on those other levels, which will bring you different results in your life. Stimulate the growth.
If this is, if there's some aspect of this that's revealing our own nature in this, it's interesting. I think for somebody like Tom and I and other people that are in this strange transition process, when you can start to recognize the chart in your own being, and then maybe not in that particular moment know that that's where you're at, because we know that that's not the case because you pointed that out many times. but then to start recognizing, okay, I know what it's like now to be at that level, and I know that I don't want to do that anymore. Or something, there's a self-correcting once you can start recognizing it, because you don't want to be in that,
No, and these are conscious, it's your consciousness then, because you're changing by making conscious choices, you're changing your consciousness. And then that's where you gravitate to, or you choose not to gravitate somewhere else.
It's
conscious.
self-correcting too, though, in a way, because it's
it does. Yeah, there's parts that there's a lot of parts to us, and they have intelligence too.
Innumerable lives. Right?
Yeah. Well, and we part of this journey is to be able to utilize those other levels of awareness that are part of us. We just haven't engaged them because we haven't been able to consciously come in contact with them. And that's part of the journey.
I think that's great. I think it's very nice to be able to access them. Don't get me wrong. I agree. You don't want to hang out there. It's not where you want to be stuck. And you know.
Yeah,
So-
but that's all a growth process and you keep going.
Yeah, I get that. Thank God for that.
So we are at, do you want to extend this or do we want to,
Whatever you'd like to do.
we're at 8 o'clock.
Okay, you want to call it there for the week?
I think so. Let's do that.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah. Some people may appreciate 1 hour.
Oh, hold on a second here.
Little bite-sized chunks.
Yeah.